Hi, I'm Steve Addison, and you're listening to the Movements Podcast, the podcast for people who want to multiply disciples and churches everywhere. Today we're talking to Joey and June Gordy in Nairobi, Kenya, about what it's going to take to see multiplying disciples and churches across the continent of Africa.
We were nicely asked to leave India due to our evangelistic activity there. So in the meantime, we moved to Malaysia, and we were still working with South Asians as non-resident missionaries out of Malaysia. And we were really happy there. And I felt this stirring in my quiet time one morning, just thinking about how wonderful it was there and how happy we were. And we were really thriving. I just felt the Spirit stirring me saying, get ready. And Joey randomly got an email one night asking us to move to Africa to help with training IMB missionaries there. And we honestly just laughed out loud. But no, we're not going to move to Africa. We love working with South Asians. We love where we are. We had started work there also in Malaysia, and things were going really well. And so we actually said no right off the bat. And the person who was asking us said, don't give me an answer till you've really prayed about this. And so we started really seeking the Lord and fasting and praying. And Joey went out to visit. And after a month of really seeking the Lord, we felt 100% without a doubt that God was calling us to do this and to move to Africa. We felt like Nairobi was a good city to work out of if you're trying to focus a central location. Our family had actually just gotten through praying for every country in Africa. And we looked at the statistics on Operation World for each country. And I remember that Kenya was 60% Christian. And when Joey and I were 22 and first left for the field, our heart was to just not build on another man's foundation and to go where the gospel hadn't been preached. So I remember feeling really shooken, like, God, why are you calling us to live in this place that's 60% Christian? And what's going on? And it was kind of a crisis for me. So we got to Kenya, and shortly after, I started realizing that the nations were in Nairobi, and nations that are very unreached, the Sudanese, the Somalians, they're right there and accessible. And God's shown us that from this place, so many people can be reached. He also kind of changed our thinking on just really what he's calling us to do. We used to think of it more as a place, but now we have this clarity of focus where we just see this beauty in sharing the gospel and raising up disciples and forming churches that multiply. And we just feel like that for us is the calling. And it doesn't have as much to do with the place. And wherever he takes us, even back home to North Carolina, that's what we're going to be doing for the rest of our life, wherever we are.
But someone told us sometimes it's more important who you serve with than where you serve. And so I've been chewing on that for a few years now, because I think the previous 15 or however many years we've been overseas, we've always been targeting the least reached or the most remote locations, so the people place. And that can be quite taxing, actually. There's a need for it. It can be quite taxing without a team and without the support structure. And when I say team, I really mean like a community of practice. I don't mean, a traditional structure of team. I mean those who are pursuing the same task alongside of you. And so Lord's sort of putting us in a season of, one, relearning what a true team is, and two, how can we invest our lives? It's almost like divesting, if I'm honest, like divest our lives into others. It's like, how do we give what we have and give it away? So that we can raise up the next generation of foreign missionaries as well as local missionaries who either come here or go out.
What was the transition like for your kids?
So I'm laughing because we had in Malaysia, we had 6 kids, and our youngest were twins, and that really threw us for a loop. And I had been praying about whether we were done or to have more children for a while. And one night, it was probably 1 a.m, and I was finishing cleaning the kitchen. Joey was traveling, and I just cried, and I prayed. I said, God, I can't have another child. Maybe if we moved to Africa or something, then. And people have asked me, why did you pray Africa? And I don't know. I don't know why I said Africa in that moment. We had no thoughts of moving to Africa. Then we found out we were moving to Africa, and I told Joey, I need to tell you about this prayer that I prayed. And I had envisioned Africa as you have a yard where kids can run around. Up until moving here, we had lived in apartments and just Asian style life where it's not so conducive to kids living the little house in the prairie life. So we moved here. We did have another baby. We got to live on about 15 acres of a Baptist property. And the kids just turned into little naturalists and got to live the life I think they were created to live. And we're really happy.
Yeah. I'll transition. It's funny how they always look back at the last place they lived in. It's such fond memories to them. So they'll often talk about Malaysia. They don't really talk about India much. It's been too long. Yeah, but they'll talk about Malaysia and the friends they had. So I think we all have a longing for what was, and so there's certainly transition there.
Yeah, for the kids, there's a sorrow in their hearts of all the friends they've said goodbye to, and even the foods they love. In our house, we will have like food from China from when we lived there, the food we loved there, and the food we loved in Malaysia, and the food we loved in India. And people staying with us usually, comment that like, where did you guys learn to love all these different foods? And it's just kind of like those pieces from everywhere God's taken us that we love. And so you have the sorrow of all those places that you loved and you're missing and you had to say goodbye to, but then you have such a richness of experience and rich friendships that you've gotten to have.
So what did ministry look like when you started out?
The harvest was plentiful and has been plentiful for probably a number of decades. I think we have to look back and thank, generations of missionaries and just movements across Africa. Most of them looked denominational, but the gospel seed was sown far and wide over the last 200 plus years. And so a lot of people actually gave their lives, in fact, for that cause. So by the time we show up, and many others in this generation show up, there has been a foundation of the gospel in the sub-Saharan regions of Africa. So there is a hunger. What we found, though, whatever came with the gospel was steeped in tradition. So the husk. So if the kernel was the gospel, the husk was tradition. And it is very deep. All kinds of traditions. Most of them look denominational, but all kinds of traditions that are really binding men and women. I believe actually keeping them from being fruitful, if I'm just honest, keeping them from being full of the Spirit, keeping them from being the priesthood of the believer, keeping them from evangelism and disciple making, and you name it. It really is a big issue, maybe our biggest issue. So while the harvest is plentiful, there's so much baggage and tradition. It's been interesting trying to cut through that and walk through that and call people into a step of obedience out of tradition. I'd also say there's a generation, so sort of in the mix of all that, there's a generation, it might be a global generation of youth that are a bit fed up with what they've had before, what their fathers told them was the right way, and it just hasn't, maybe they're more honest or more transparent, but it doesn't sit well with them. The sitting in a church once a week, maybe the hypocrisy they see in themselves and in others. And so there's a hunger for something different. I think you have people experimenting with maybe other religions in Africa. We're finding people are going back to their ancestor traditions. So worshiping mountains and places, especially one of the tribes here, the Kikuyu. They've seen what the colonizers brought, which again is the tradition, right? The gospel may have been buried in tradition, but they see the tradition and they look on it as harmful. And so many of them are trying to go back to what their ancestors worshipped. But also some of them are hungry for something other than, and are finding it in the real Jesus, not in the church tradition Jesus. So there's a mixture there.
Well, it was just interesting for us coming out of 10 years ministry in India, where we knew the language and we had gotten to, I guess, a very deep level of ministry. We were at the level where we were doing theological education, kind of on the fly type thing. And I know that especially for Joey, it was very stimulating and interesting. And here we are back in Africa, and we don't know the language, and we're just starting from ground zero again, starting all over. And, just the going out, hitting the streets and trying to find those partners. And I know in the beginning there, we trained over 2,000 people in just evangelism. And Joey got to the point where he's like, I just want to move on to deeper things, finding those fourth soil guys, church planters that you can really just pour the majority of your time into. And so we were just longing for that rich ministry. But on the flip side, the opportunity to start over was just such a huge learning experience for us. It was almost like everything we've done, everything we learned, we get to just start over and learn more, do it better, do it differently. God sent us Justin and Rachel White in the middle of that, who brought all these new ideas and new tools from what they had been doing in North Carolina. And it was just a real sharpening time. We felt like we were just babies again, learning everything new. And I don't think we would trade that.
Yeah. So for the Whites, their intensity to the gospel and to disciple making, I don't think I've met others like them who are just so focused and intent on gospel proclamation. And so just a quick story behind that. When they came in, they have two daughters. Their two daughters are the same age as two of our children. And so they came in, they were on the ground like 4 days, maybe 3 or 4 days.
Yeah, their fourth day on the ground.
So 4 days in a foreign country, and they're immediately training people and out sharing the gospel. And I think it just took us by surprise. We're used to, forgive me for saying it, we're used to holding people's hands and gently guiding them through their first steps of ministry and overseas life. That was certainly not the case. I felt like they ended up holding our hands a lot when it came to their intensity and how they were sharing the gospel and training others. And then on top of that, with their girls, immediately had their girls out training. So their girls were not only along with them in the ministry, they were in the front of the ministry with them and leading some of the ministry. And so that was, I think, inspiring for us and for our children as well to really engage as a family in the training ministry. Also the evangelism part, taking our kids out, making sure that we're getting building habits as a family of sharing the gospel and making disciples together. But there's just people everywhere. It seems like all the time, just on the street, milling around. Most people don't have automobiles, so they're walking everywhere. It's different than the Western world, right? So there's just people about. And so we would just, stop one person, hey, come and start sharing the gospel. And then I'd stop someone and my daughter would share the gospel. It was just the two of us that day. We came up to a whole tray of, he was selling like bubble gum and peanuts and, that was it. So maybe one or two other things, some bananas on the side of the road. That was how he was making ends meet. So no one was standing there. So we just started sharing with him. And Kira, my daughter, was able to share the gospel with him. And we're just using really simple stuff like the 15-second testimony, which, by the way, we learned after coming to Africa. Actually, we had some NPL Army guys teach us the 15-second testimony and the two kingdoms. So those two things came from an NPL Army network brought to Africa, and we just retooling as people come in and show us what's working in their part of the world. So we used those two tools. Kira and my daughter used those two tools and led this young man to faith. I think he was probably 19, maybe 20 at the time. And so it was interesting because then the very next day, maybe very soon after, he came to our place to be baptized. And so he was led to faith on the street by my daughter. And then we had a missionary with us who was brand new on the field, had been on the field maybe a week, and had never baptized, or really, I don't think ever made a disciple. ever. As far as he could baptize someone who's never done it. So it became a learning experience for him as well as my daughter. So this other missionary, they never baptized anybody. They baptized this young man and was just so full of everybody was full of joy. The way this team was working together, right? This community working together to see the gospel proclaimed, someone come into the kingdom, another baptized. And now this young man, he actually is, he's still faithful, very faithful, actually, sharing the gospel. I was with him maybe 2 weeks ago, and someone came to faith in his neighborhood, and he's looking at starting a church in this place where he's currently living. So it's interesting to see how that started just from trying to get out and share the gospel and develop rhythms. I feel like we're setting the bar, the filter, higher and higher as we train. We meet a lot of people who call Jesus their King, their Lord. We meet a lot of people who may be even interested in discipleship. Fewer people who are interested in sharing the gospel. Fewer still who would be interested in opening their home and starting a church. So the more we train, the more we realize if we set the bar at who is willing to open their home and or get into other people's homes and start churches, it helped us identify those who were at least willing to go that far. So most of the ones that have proven to be fourth soil, we didn't lead to faith. I'm trying to think of, there may be one or two, actually. The others we met. In fact, most of them we either met through training, which was the purpose of doing all that wide training, or we met while we were on the streets sharing the gospel with people. Several, actually. We would be out in tough neighborhoods of town, just sharing the gospel as much as we could. And as we're sharing the gospel, people would come in behind us and listen. And once we were done with that, we'd turn around and this is a pretty common story, actually. Someone would say, I thought I was the only one sharing the gospel here until I saw you guys today. What are you doing? And so we would make a connection. Several of our fourth soil people were already out doing what they knew how to do. And we just happened to be out there with some sort of visibility. And so they tagged along and we were working together.
One of our partners, Robert, he found us online because he had a church and it was growing and it was headed towards just becoming a bigger and bigger church. And God just really put on his heart to multiply churches rather than grow one big one. And so he found us online and reached out and asked for training.
No, he actually found a friend of ours in England. I don't know how, maybe through Facebook. We have a friend in England who he connected with, and then because he was in Kenya, he got back to us.
Yeah, so Joey went out there and not always sure of the motive of people reaching out online. You know, Joey said right off, like, we're going to train and equip, but we're not giving money out.
I've learned to set that filter early and often because especially people who meet us online or on the street, I never know. It's difficult to know the motive. Even after some time, it's difficult to know the motive. So with him, I was very upfront. I said, listen, you need to know that there won't be any money at all in this. But if we continue down this road, there'll be love, there'll be training, and we'll work together, there'll be brotherhood. Just setting that expectation early.
He was so thirsty and hungry. And when they did the training, it was like, this is exactly what I was looking for. And this is what God's put on my heart. And he's really taken off.
He's so fun. So we visited once or twice. He just took everything that we had and gave it away, which is how it's designed, but seldom actually works that way. Usually there's a blockage somewhere, but he was just giving it to everybody. And I'm talking like any tool we had, whether it was this testimony or the kingdoms or whatever, he just immediately would give it away. Well, after about 2 months, he was at Justin's house, just visiting and getting sharpened. And we were sitting at the table and he goes, guys, if we go down this road, this is a movement. Like, none of us had used that language with him. He's like, this is going to be a big movement. And so it just like the light bulbs came on. If we continue to equip people this way and hand it off, we can't really slow it down. It's going to continue to grow. And that became his first stuckage, actually, was he realized he was on the cusp of a movement and had no clue how to develop leaders who were moving so quickly ahead of him. Mm-hmm. And so we began to coach through how do we help his leaders? How do we help him and his leaders? How do we start that work? So that's Robert. And actually right now, he just got back from a trip to Rwanda where he was helping some movement leaders in other parts of East Africa get vision and tools. And so the Lord is doing something with him and the network that he's a part of, but also stretching him into other networks right now. And he's doing some coaching and some learning from those guys.
Okay. So I think about Robert. I just think simple obedience. He just purely took the training and said, okay, this is what I'm going to do, and went out and did it. And we haven't had to battle with him about just trying to make it more official or more elaborate or trying to add on. He's just simply doing it.
Yeah, with Robert, our role, he's a really faithful brother. Now, we spent some time in his village, which is not close to here. And so I think that really speaks a lot to him, just staying with him in his village and being out among his people. There's a pretty severe alcohol problem in his village. And so I think sharing the gospel on the streets with him and his people has been just modeling it, but also more being with him, alongside of him was huge to Robert. Then he's been here and stayed some time with us. I wish we had a lot more time. I wish he was closer, because I think time and relationship is the answer to that question. What's our role? But we have to make do, like when he's around and when we're there. But it's all coaching. He comes to our mid-levels. He comes to sometimes he's leading a mid-level, like I just mentioned. He was helping with one in Rwanda just a couple weeks ago.
Rose is a woman on the coast, and so she's working in a predominantly Muslim area, and we know missionaries in that area. Like, there's a certain tribe, they haven't seen anyone believe in that tribe in the last 10 years, and she's got whole churches of Muslim background believers starting and multiplying within that tribe and others. God's just brought these leaders around her that she's coaching and discipling, and they're dividing and conquering and working together, and their churches are multiplying down to Tanzania now.
Yeah.
And it's really exciting. Just places where people said, this can't work. People aren't going to believe here. Mm-hmm. The work's too hard.
Yeah, there's a handful in the city as well. Just once the whites moved here, we sort of adopted this residency leadership development program that they and others piloted in the U.S. We just finished our first year residency this week, so it's been going for a year. And out of that, there's a handful of others who are urban, you might want to say, co-vocational type leaders who and just spread out across the city, who have been very faithful to share the gospel, start new work in their areas, and committed to one another as well. So we're seeing that in Kenya as we move further afield to other parts of East Africa or other parts of Africa. We're also seeing breakthroughs. The issue, Steve, that we're finding is just limited amounts of time in order. If relationship is the glue, especially for leadership development, if that's the glue of spending time together and in the harvest and in the word, it's really difficult to do that with people who are in other countries. So that's taken a lot of time to get to that. We're on the cusp, I think, of trying something different. Knowing that relationship is what we need, and knowing we're seeing these sort of fourth soil people emerge in different parts of Africa, but we don't have the resource man hours to put into deep relationship in every country at this point. We're praying the Lord will send more laborers, and we will. But for the time being, we're praying through starting accelerated residency, probably in Nairobi, where people from other parts of the continent can come in for 4 to 6 weeks and we get 4 to 6 weeks of relational time in the Word with one another and out in the harvest, building these rhythms together and then launching back. So that's probably something that will start in 2023, knowing that that will be a limited time only. So once we get those fourth soil partners up and going in Ghana and Nigeria and Morocco, wherever they come from, South Africa, then they'll also have their own residencies running. We won't have to keep bringing people here.
Tell us about the sort of people you're looking for to join you on the ground in different parts of Africa.
Back to the story of the whites coming out and training on their fourth day, and it really blew us away and challenged us. We just never seen anybody do that, and they were able to do that because other people had done model, assist, watch, and leave with them and worked with them in the field, and they'd gotten experience working in their home state. I mean, they're in America before they came, and I think that's the kind of people we're looking for. But just people that have done this where they live in their home before they take off to go to a new land. Another option is just coming out, joining our team here in Nairobi and doing life with us and doing model, assist, watch, and leave with us here. And with this, we have a strong team here. So working with the team and learning it and then launching out from Nairobi.
If we could demystify missions just a little bit and say, really, what we're looking for are disciple makers who feel a call or a desire to be global. Many years, many generations, people have raised their hands to go overseas and not been trained or not been really making disciples in their home context. And so they would go overseas and then learn how to do it, perhaps on the field or en route to the field to do that. And I think if we could flip that paradigm and see disciple makers who have the desire to go somewhere else and help out where help is wanted and needed, then that's probably our ideal candidate to come work here. Also, the caveat is this is a huge continent. Our globes don't do justice to how enormous it is because we've had to pack it into something we can carry around with us or a map. But if you look at how the continent is actually shaped, it just puts in perspective the diversity of language, people, place. It's massive. So our goal with bringing people in for a season on the team is just that it would be a season. So I've been telling people interested, come in for 6 months, maybe a year, but don't harvest, learn things like cross-cultural evangelism, especially working with Muslims in town and things like that. And then let us launch you either with a team or to start a team somewhere else. And so we're identifying cities across the continent where we feel like the next step should be, the next launching pad should be for the next team and the next after that. So that's ideal candidates would come into Nairobi, hopefully having already had a season of disciple making somewhere in the world, preferably at home, but not necessarily. Could be somewhere else. And then come in, learn the rhythms that we're developing here in urban ministry as well as somewhere else and do the same to multiply it.
What's the opportunity for Africa right now?
Well, there's more Christians in Africa than any other continent on the world. And there is a vacuum of discipleship. And COVID here really shook things up. Post-COVID, when we have conversations with believers, they all believing in Jesus was never a problem, but COVID shook them up and made them question how they're living their life. And a lot of them realize they're not really living for Christ. And they want to start sharing the gospel and discipling others. They want to do this, but they don't know how. We have these conversations daily.
Yeah.
People want it with this desire. The story is usually the same. God's lately been showing me that there's more, but I just don't know how.
I think the global disciple-making potential is, I don't think we can even calculate it from Africa, but it remains potential right now. Like June said, sub-Saharan Africa is the most densely populated Christian continent on the planet right now. So since Jesus was resurrected and went back to heaven, this is where the majority of Christians right now in this season. However, it remains potential for many of the reasons you just mentioned. It's Jesus is very cultural. We believe in Jesus, following him being obedient is something else. We're seeing people turn that corner, but not in vast numbers. Also, like I started off saying, there's so much tradition and so many barriers to break through. So the potential is huge. I think the more disciple makers who have left traditions behind, who can either come up from the ground or come from other fields and join us here, that potential can be realized. First of all, while we have sub-Saharan Africa densely populated with Christians, you have the Horn of Africa that is it really unengaged. I guess the gospel is there and has been there, but it's just militantly Islamic. So just a real challenge when it comes to moving movements of Christian movements going that direction. So there's the Horn of Africa, and then all of the north of Africa above us. And so one of the challenges is moving, that Christian movement north and east, but also inviting others from anywhere in the world to come in, partner with us, and help launch hubs in the north and the east, so that when we send people from the southern parts of Africa or the sub-Saharan parts of Africa, they have teams to land on, and they have rhythms to join, and they have people helping them learn the right language and the right rhythms in those places.
This continent is being strategically targeted by the Nation of Islam. They have their strategy of going into villages and building schools and providing healthcare if you become Muslim. And they're trying very hard, pouring lots of effort and money into making this continent, turning this continent Muslim.
Yeah.
And it's effective. And Islam is growing in Africa. And I feel like there is a real spiritual battle going on here right now. And I feel like we can't be asleep anymore, and we need to engage.
It's effective and it's visible. However, I think the real Christian movement has to be underground and almost invisible. I think because of the traditional barriers that we're facing, unless it is an underground movement, it doesn't move. It hardly moves in the sub-Saharan pieces that have had the gospel for so many years, but it certainly doesn't move into places like Somalia, Sudan, Eritrea, and beyond. So I think the equipping of the underground movement starts here, and helping people break all of those traditional identities and go back to sort of the insurgent Jesus movement that's vibrant, but also a bit underground. I think that's the training ground for sending people further afield.
Visit movements.net, episode 289, to find out more about this great work in Africa. Thanks for listening. I'm Steve Addison for the Movements Podcast.